Hello, thanks everyone. We're just going to give a few minutes for people to join. In the meantime, just going to launch this poll to see where everybody is in with regards to NIS2 for now. So best bear with us for another minute or two, and we'll get things underway. Just one more minute, waiting for some stragglers. Some interesting answers coming in here in the meantime. Okay, let's see if I can end. There's a couple more. We'll just end the poll and see if I can share it with everyone successfully. Here we go. Can everybody see that? Can you guys see that okay?
Yeah, we see it.
Great. Well, it's interesting. I mean, lucky for us that it seems to be most people are just getting started. So you guys are in the right place. And it seems like some people are not, or they think that they're not in the scope of NIS2 as well, which is one of the topics that we're going to be looking at as well. And some people have already started implementing some measures too. So that's a great starting point, I think, to see if I can to get started. So thanks for participating in that. So welcome everyone to our latest industrial cyber webinar. Today we're going to be discussing, in case you didn't guess already, the NIS2 Directive, and really why it's a game changer specifically for industrial organizations, and not just the bigger ones. Everyone tends to think about the big corporations. It actually, surprisingly, the NIS2 Directive covers some very small organizations too. And unlike its predecessor, the NIS2 Directive extends reach. So you might not even be aware that you're under the scope. But before I get carried away with all that, let's introduce the panel. So Ruben, over to you. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Jonathan. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining this webinar. My name is Ruben Lobo. I'm a Director of Product Management at Cisco. I'm part of the Industrial IoT group within Cisco, and I'm responsible for our industrial Ethernet and our cybersecurity portfolio.
Ewald, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, so my name is Ewald Munz. Thank you for joining. At Splunk, I look after manufacturing, automotive, and sustainability in Europe. And obviously, OT security is a very important part of this job. I'm based here in Stuttgart in Germany.
Fantastic. Thanks, guys. So my name, for those of you who don't know, is Jonathan Gordon, and I'm the directing analyst here at Takepoint Research. So I lead the industrial cybersecurity practice. So most of my day is spent with clients, end users, asset owners, operators, etc., helping them really to understand the evolving industrial cybersecurity market and landscape, technology, services, etc. So just the point of order before we move on. If anybody does have any questions during the session, feel free to throw them out. Just submit them by the QA or the chat button, and we'll try to get to as many as we can during the session as possible. So we have limited time. Let's get started. So I will attempt in about 100 seconds or less to recap NIS2, just so everyone starts on the same page. So the original NIS directive was introduced back in 2016, and it was really the EU's first sort of very comprehensive cybersecurity legislation. Recently, it was updated, so the NIS2 directive expands that scope quite dramatically to cover more sectors, verticals, entities, and really is a much better sort of reflection of the interconnected digital world, if you like, digital, in our case, physical as well. So it's a big step in strengthening the EU's cybersecurity defenses. And by broadening the scope, it also imposes stricter security requirements. And the concept is really to sort of promote this harmonization across the EU, making sure that all of the countries within the bloc really acknowledge the evolving cybersecurity threat landscape. And then there's this need to create resilience and a unified response across the whole of Europe. So the main goal is to ensure that resilience of those of the critical infrastructure, the critical industries, really safeguard Europe and prevent. The most important thing is about preventing some sort of cascading effect or failure with as a result of a major cybersecurity attack. So compliance is mandatory, and there are significant financial penalties for non-compliance. In fact, Iwal just pointed out before we started that depending on what sort of entity, the fines or penalties, the financial ones can be up to 10 million euros for a particular entity, or 2% of revenue. So they're considerable, and they're not the only penalties. So I'm not sure I managed to do that in 100 seconds or less, but I will try and speed things up as we go. So what's changed? It's always interesting. NIS2, as I said, covers many more sectors, including things like manufacturing, production, and digital providers, digital service providers as well. So if you have over $10 million in revenue, or even more than 50 employees, you may very well fall under the scope even without realizing it. So organizations must implement stronger cybersecurity measures and also regularly report on their cybersecurity posture. There's also a new timeframe for incident reporting, which they have to report of an incident, a detection of a new incident within 24 hours. Another part that's very important and has changed is that the senior management has a lot more accountability when it comes to cybersecurity compliance and risk management. And that's going to be a big part of what we're going to talk about as well. So NIS2 adopts this risk management approach, which we've seen in other areas as well, particularly in the US. And it requires the essential and the important entities, so the two sort of categories of entities. It requires those entities to follow specific measures set by each member state. And those sort of measures include comprehensive risk management, assessment, establishing these very strong cybersecurity policies, implementing prevention, detection, recovery, etc. And lastly, supply chain security, which also we'll be getting into, is a very big part of it. So looking at the relationships between direct suppliers and your service providers, etc., is going to be a part of this as well. So I think overall, these organizational, technical, operational guidelines, I guess we can call them, they're not just about ticking check boxes for compliance. So we're going to show you how you can use this as an opportunity really to beef up your cybersecurity posture and your resilience as well. And the key for us is looking differently at compliance. So compliance is often seen as a burden or an obligation, which, to be honest, it can be, right? Anybody who's had to go through some compliance can say that. But the NIS2 compliance can also be viewed as an opportunity, in particular for people like us that deal with industrial cybersecurity. So it's an opportunity to align your stakeholders with these goals of the NIS2. And you can leverage this directive to drive a comprehensive approach within your organization, aligning stakeholders, aligning leaders with this approach on how to manage risk. So we're going to shortly look at how NIS2 can enhance your overall cybersecurity framework, identify, mitigate risks, and protect critical assets. So by approaching compliance proactively, I guess, sort of getting ahead of things, you don't just meet the regulatory requirements, but you can also fortify your organization against these threats. And in particular, NIS2 brings significant changes around the role of leadership. So we talked about the fines, but management must now approve and really oversee cybersecurity strategies. And so this ensures that there's accountability all the way up to the top, to the board, to the management. And this shift emphasizes this top-down approach of supporting, creating, and assessing risk from cybersecurity. So for me in particular, this is a very big part and a very big part of the change, and something that obviously people in management need to take a very close look at. So NIS2 really increases this accountability from within the organizations. As I said, focus particularly on senior management. And I guess it really ensures that the appropriate security policies are in place and effectively executed. So the management really needs to define and lead the organizational cybersecurity strategy, defining that risk appetite for the organization, and collaborating and making sure there's alignment throughout the organization. And the good thing for us is this really elevates the role, in particular the CISO or the person that was struggling to get eyes on this problem before. Hopefully will help give them a push and really give them a platform to help protect their organizations. So it really means that cybersecurity is treated as a critical issue at the very highest level in the organization. Lastly, another area that sort of overlaps here is this transparency around public disclosure. So if you have an incident, you need to disclose within a certain time frame. And this also puts pressure, I guess, on senior management to make sure that they're doing all they can to prevent that type of outcome. So organizational alignment and encouraging this proactive approach to risk is really key. So with that, that sort of completes the introduction and the overview. We'll get started with the panel. So if you're good to go, Ewald, I guess, what are your industrial customers saying when the topic of NIS2 comes up? What are they talking about today?
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. I mean, the NIS2 directive obviously is a security directive, and it comprises both IT as well as OT security. And of course, let's say compared to IT security, OT security is a relatively young concept. And there's some McKinsey research which points out that actually that the market penetration of cybersecurity in industrial environments is only about 1 to 5%, so basically non-existent. And as you can see here on the chart here, the interest in OT security is growing strongly and reached actually an all-time high this year. So massive interest in OT security. And let's say if we talk to, let's say, larger organizations, I mean, obviously they work on this, but of course it's not so easy because especially there's a lack of security experts in the OT space. So this, let's say, this increase in demand for OT security goes actually hand in hand also with the increase in NIS2. So if you go to the next slide, please, Jonathan. You can see also that the interest in NIS2, sorry, if you look at the Google searches, it's actually exploded. And although companies are researching, we can see that smaller companies, they maybe adopt like more a wait and see approach. They're not so sure if this really also affects them. But our clear message today is, yes, it affects actually all kinds of companies. So please don't adopt a wait and see approach. I mean, this is quite urgent. It comes into place in October this year. So definitely something to be top of mind.
Indeed. And I guess that the NIS2, what's interesting, I noticed that quite a few people from joining the webinar that are from outside of the EU. So why do you think, and I'm assuming some of these Google searches as well, so why do you think there's so much interest globally in the NIS2? Will it have an impact on companies outside of the EU?
Yeah, so Jonathan, I don't think it's very surprising to see, especially in this webinar, audience from outside of the EU joining. We see a lot of interest at Cisco from other countries, talking about NIS2 as well. And I think it's mainly because anybody and everybody who's kind of concerned with cybersecurity is looking at NIS2 and trying to understand how such a global cybersecurity framework is going to roll out and be implemented, right? So I think for a lot of countries that are not under the purview of NIS2, they're watching it very closely because they understand the criticality of having something like this in place to secure their own industries. Now, on the other side, you've got countries like UK and Norway who are not part of the EU, but because of their close ties to the EU and their strong trading links, they automatically they will have to comply with the regulation. And it all comes down to the fact that there are these trading links and there's an association with supply chain, right? So it's really about how you control your supply chain. And the way NIS2 works is that you might be from a different country that's not part of Europe, but you might be a supplier into a country that is under the purview of NIS2. And so as the customers, the buyers in these countries are now going to start closely monitoring and regulating their supply chain because NIS2 requires them to do so. So as a vendor who's not in Europe, supplying to companies in Europe, you now have to worry about how you're going to show that the equipment that you're supplying into these countries is, follows the right cybersecurity practices, right? And especially at Cisco, we supply a lot of equipment into European countries, and so we have been watching this too, and we're very concerned with, how this rolls out and how we take care of meeting all the compliances.
Yeah, I assume other regions and other governments are also looking at how this unfolds. Particularly, we're still, I think, a little bit short on how it's going to be implemented in specific countries as well. So there's still a lot to watch and see as this unfolds. But I think also, if you look at the US, you have certain sectors that seem to be regulated and are increasingly being looked at as regulation as well. And following this overarching type of regulation would be quite interesting to see as opposed to what's going on there and in some of the other countries, maybe in APAC as well, that are a little bit more focused on this, like Singapore or Australia, for example. Okay. I guess one of the things that I talked about earlier, and a big focus of the NIS2 is this adoption of a risk-based approach to cybersecurity, which is not new, in particular in the industrial space. Everything is we all like to hope that people start with risk in mind, right? Trying to assess the risk and understand it before they implement. But how do you see that being implemented in practice alongside the NIS2? Ruben, is that something you want to look at?
Yeah. So there's multiple aspects to this risk-based approach, right? We just spoke about the supply chain aspect of it. So if you look at the supply chain, what does that mean? What does a risk-based approach to the supply chain look like? I spoke about how NIS2 requires companies to now start looking into the risk that's being introduced into their ecosystem through suppliers, right? And we all know, Jonathan, in the cybersecurity, who are in cybersecurity practice, that a supply chain-based cybersecurity attack is probably the most devastating attack, and we've seen it in the past with things like SolarWinds, the most recent Red Hat thing that was just caught. I mean, those things can have massive implications beyond any typical attack because they tend to apply to multiple companies. And so I think it's really critical that companies start tracing suppliers and the equipment, all of the equipment that comes into their environment, right? Not just the critical ones. Like depending on the kind of industry you're in, you have some big key suppliers that you probably have good relationships with and you're monitoring a lot of things. But in certain industries, a lot of equipment flows in through machine builders and other ways in which you're not actually looking at how this equipment flows in. But now there's a high possibility that this equipment is bringing risk into your ecosystem. So you need to start monitoring like from all your suppliers. And it's important to ensure that you're keeping track of things like S-bombs. What's the software that's going into this equipment? What is the supplier's product development lifecycle, right? Are they reporting vulnerabilities? Because at the end of the day, as a company, you're liable, and so you need to keep track and make sure about all of these things. And I think the IEC 62443, the 4-1, 4-2, certifications for equipment covers most of these things and helps you get a control on cyber risk from a supplier equipment and supplier standpoint. The other big thing is about visibility. So if you think about the risk in your environment, in your OT environment, based on the assets that you have and how they're behaving, visibility is really key and foundational. Jonathan, you spoke about, when you brought up the poll, I noted a number here. Only 4% of the audience said that, they feel that they're ready for NIS2. And we see this kind of like all the time, which is many companies are either unaware, and those companies that are aware essentially are having starting trouble on how to go about securing these environments, right? And as Ewald showed in that graph, you can see the number of queries are rising, and there is a shortage of expertise in the space. So it really comes down to, IT will have to get involved and get into the space, right? There's only that many OT cybersecurity specialists out there, and that's not going to change. That's not going to change by the time this goes into place. So IT will have to step in and help their OT counterparts secure this environment. And so where do you start, right? Like, how do you go about it? And that's where I think, visibility is key. There is this perception that you require specialized equipment to secure, industrial networks. That's not necessarily true. What's true in that aspect is that you need to understand the OT space. You need to have context, and then you can use that to bring in your IT security best practices into the OT space. So, Jonathan, if you just switch to the next slide here. So just looking at what does it take? What does a risk-based approach look like in terms of securing your OT environment? It starts with, there's a set of measures that NIS2 expects you to take as a customer. And those are the ones that we've listed on the left here, which is risk analysis, incident prevention, detection, and so on and so forth. But what does that mean to you as a customer in terms of how do you go about implementing those measures, right? And that's where you need to be able to take those measures and translate them into product capabilities. Now, as I said, visibility is the key to getting started, right? Okay, understanding all your OT assets and understanding their behaviors, understanding the security posture of these OT assets, that's critical. And that's where you need specialized tools. Once you have that, you can then share that context with the rest of the typical tools within the cybersecurity framework to meet other things like, talk about incident prevention. It's really about not just stopping with an industrial DMZ, but having segmentation, below the DMZ. So the notion of IEC 62443 zone segmentation, incident detection and response. It's like putting IDSs in place but not just an IDS, but an IDS with really good threat intel, because there's an IDS and IPS is nothing without the threat intel. And when it comes to response, and I'm sure Evolve will go into a lot more detail about that, but having in place a SIEM, a SOAR, if you're a smaller company, maybe an XDR, managing these vulnerabilities and having threat intel about these vulnerabilities, not just depending on like CVS's scores, but the latest information since these are being filed. And just generic cyber hygiene, everything to do with visibility and making sure you're using the visibility to improve your posture.
Yeah, it's a good point, and I think one of the interesting things we get asked a lot on our inquiry service is the OT/IT story, and I think NIS2 also underlines the fact that it's not an OT issue and it's not an IT issue, but it's an organizational issue. It's risk to the organization. It comes in the form of cyber risk, but it doesn't focus on a particular T or technology. So the risk can be coming, as you said, from suppliers, from the IT or the enterprise side, can also be introduced from the OT side, right? We've seen cases where threats have been walked into shop floors on USBs or removable media. In Industry 4.0, you see clouds connected for analytics, etc. So this sort of siloed approach to technology, I think, is also dissipating when it comes to understanding that the liability and the risk is to the organization. Sure, it gets very specific when you go inside these environments and look at the technology, but the high level risk and the focus of NIS2 is on the organization. And my hope is that this will help break down some of those silos and get people to start looking and collaborating across some of those silos too. One of the other areas that we talked about with regards to the requirements is this strict reporting mandate, and what are the implications for industrial organizations, right? It's reporting both on your plans and what you're doing, but it's also reporting on these incidents. So what are the implications for industrial organizations, larger or small, when it comes to reporting? You are there. I think you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. These mandates are actually very clearly laid out in terms of timelines. And so affected companies have actually only 24 hours. So I repeat, only 24 hours when they first become aware of an incident to submit an initial report. So just 24 hours. And after this, they also need to provide more additional in-depth information within 22 hours. And then even more, a full report within 1 month. So of course, all this, let's say, compliance and reporting kind of mandate needs a platform approach, like a security platform like Cisco and Splunk, to make a detection, investigation, and remediation simpler and much more powerful by unifying this cybersecurity across IT as well as OT environments.
So it sounds like a good time for another poll on this subject. Bear with me. So we just discussed risk-based approach and the implications for reporting incidents. As you said, very short time frames, and it's interesting how you define an event versus an incident, these type of things. But I guess that's for another webinar. But so the question here is really about what you're doing in this area. What sort of tools, capabilities, processes do you have in place? And as we all like to say, this is a journey. So I guess we're trying to figure out here where most people are in this journey. And I'll give another few seconds for people to wake up and click the button. But it's already looking quite interesting. So I think that the bottom line is, and as Ruben pointed out, the visibility is really table stakes. It's the starting point today. You need to be able to understand what you have in OT, what are the assets, what they're doing, what their vulnerabilities are, the exposure, etc., but not just in OT as well, and we'll touch on that in a second. So one more mad rush, and here we go. So the answers here seem to be that say that majority or a large portion still don't have tools in place to detect OT security events, which I am sure the folks at Cisco and Splunk can help you out on. But in general, as we always say, it's very much the starting point. There are a lot of solutions around today that will enable you to get visibility, to gain visibility. But visibility itself is not an answer. Visibility doesn't help you mitigate these risks. It just provides you with information to do that, which is critical. Then we see, as we move along, we see some people that have IDS in the DMC. We have some people with visibility tools that are detecting anomalies. And then we have some people that are quite far down the maturity and quite far down the journey that have a unified IT/OT view of the global attack surface. So all in all, it's not a bad response. Obviously, we can all do better, but I think it's a pretty good start. You all, regarding the unified view, in particular with regards to what we talked about with NIS2 and this reporting, how essential is it, and what does that look like?
Yeah, if you go to the next slide, please. Thank you. I would like to explain this with the so-called Purdue model. I believe you're all familiar with this Purdue model. On the left-hand side is more the IT zone, on the right-hand side more the OT zones. And we heard visibility is really essential, and this is specifically essential during a cyber attack, because the worst spot you can be in is that you don't know that you have a cyber attack. And actually, the attackers, they're very, very patient. As you can see the number down there, it takes on average about 140 days before such an attack is actually detected. So that's why this visibility is essential. And if you look now at the left-hand side, so an attack typically starts from the IT zone. So typically, let's say via a phishing email. And then the virus moves laterally. You can see it eats itself through the system until it reaches the ground rules in the OT world. Basically, the control systems where it can lead to a production shutdown or damage something, or maybe even worse, a shutdown and asking for ransomware, of course. Yeah. And as I said, this is very, very slow, this kind of lateral movement. And that's why it's very, very hard to detect. And many companies, as I mentioned before, they're quite mature in their IT security. You have to have an IT team in place, which of course works wonderfully. However, as I mentioned before, also the OT space is still pretty immature. Yeah? And there are excellent tools in place, for example, Cisco Cyber, which can really help you with visibility in this space. So on the one hand side, the IT sorry, the IT security, the OT security, for example, with Cisco Cyber, but this is not enough, because even you have these two, let's say these two seams in places, it still needs to be connected. So you need this basically this interconnectedness between OT as well as IT. And with a platform approach, like for example with Splunk and Cisco, you can have this unified visibility, OT as well as IT environment. And let me repeat myself. So visibility across IT as well as OT is really essential during such a cyber attack.
Yeah, I think what we say is it's very critical to be able to follow the kill chain from where it comes in. So if it comes in through the IT or the enterprise side, to literally follow the kill chain all the way down to if it crosses that cyber physical boundary. So in some of the more spectacular cases that we've seen in the OT space, the focus eventually is on attacking a piece of equipment, either disabling or make it do something that it's not supposed to do. And in that case, it switches into the physical realm. And you really want to be able to track that back all the way as quickly as possible, both in regards to reporting the incident, understanding the incident, remediating the incident, but also preventing it for next time. So getting that complete flow is really essential to doing that threat analysis, threat hunting, and then remediation and prevention. And that's what, at least for my money, makes OT and the industrial side much more complex, but also more interesting, I should say. So I guess that one of the issues that we do see here, Ruben mentioned SIEM and SOAR, and I'm sure that Ewald, you can talk about SIEM and SOAR as well for quite a while. We're creating lots of data here, enormous amounts of data. And one of the issues that we hear from customers is we have more vendors, more data, which is great, but sometimes we get overawed by the amount of data, the amount of alerts that pop up, sometimes false positives and things like that. The question is, what are you seeing with your customers? How can they deal with this sort of avalanche? How can they focus on what's really going to be important with regards of both meeting and compliance for NIS2, but also going beyond that and helping secure their organizations? And sort of what role, I guess, does AI and ML have to play in that?
Yeah, I mean, the simple answer is to play it smart and to automate as much as possible. So a typical headache of a plant manager is the extremely high amount of or the high volume of false alerts. So the noise, the SOC is very noisy. So plant managers, they get sometimes 5,000, sometimes even 10,000 false alerts per day. And of course, these guys, I mean, they're completely overwhelmed. It's humanly not possible to tackle such kind of false alerts. I mean, on a daily basis, I mean, they just get burned out and very, very quickly. And the answer is here what we call a risk-based alerting, so kind of automation tool. So every alert gets a so-called risk score. And once this risk score hits a certain threshold, only then you get an alert. And of all this can be, of course, automated, customized to every customer's environment. And this means, so instead of getting 10,000 alerts, you may be able to get 2 or 3 important alerts per day. Yeah, so play it smart and automate as much as possible to prevent this fatigue alert.
Yeah, I think it's becoming more and more essential as we get the capability to look at these threats end to end and to track the kill chain. How do we get help focusing on what's important? So that's incredibly important. Another area, trying to cover as much ground that makes sense for industrial organizations within NIS2. Another one that's quite interesting, one of the areas is zero trust. And we seem to be seeing this all over the place. It's popping up everywhere, in particular now in the industrial space, both in the US and Europe in the NIS2. So, and NIS2 specifically calls out zero trust as critical to securing these organizations, and it's become important for industrial organizations as well. Well, I guess the poster child for zero trust in industrial has been remote access, right? And that's why we have put up this poll. So it often starts with remote access just because there are so many third-party contractors and employees from outside. It might be from outside the site, from outside the plant, or coming into a remote location which is far away and not accessible. So the need for remote access is acute in a lot of industrial organizations. And that's where we're sort of seeing the initial traction for zero trust network access. Not the only place, but it's kind of like it makes sense to everyone to have these sort of a zero trust overlay into starting with remote access. So let's have a look at some of these answers here. That seem to be moving around quite a bit. Gonna stop it there. So we asked you guys what you're doing currently for remote access, or hopefully secure remote access into the OT environment in particular. And most of the people here, or the largest percentage, have put up VPN only. And then there's a jump server, so coming into a DMZ and then jumping out of the DMZ. And then there's about 20, a little over 20% with a dedicated secure remote access. ZTA, that's a lot of ZTNA, a lot of acronyms in there. And then using a vendor control gateway to get in. So there again, this, like everything else that we do, is a sort of journey as a long maturity model, which we happen to have a report specifically in this area if you're interested. But the idea is to try and get the access for third party and employees as secure as possible. And Zero Trust definitely has a role, emerging role to start in that area. So having said that, Ruben, why don't you sort of walk us through how the Zero Trust, sort of the NIS2 measures sort of align with Zero Trust, particularly for remote access? I think you're on mute.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Better.
So, just going back to the whole NIS2 approach, it's a risk-based approach, and we're bringing the zero trust kind of angle, to meet or comply with that risk-based approach, right? And so, in terms of the risk, we have risk from supply chain, which on one angle we discussed was equipment that's coming into this environment. But like you said, in many of these industrial networks, you have a lot of remote vendors coming in, right? So it could be your own employees, or it could be third parties coming in as part of your supply chain. And as Evol mentioned, if you look at that kill chain, a lot of it comes from the enterprise side of the house, and makes its way into the OT domain, right? And so that kind of applies here to remote users as well. There's one of the biggest risks that you have is remote users bringing in threats into your environment, not on purpose, but by mistake, without them knowing it. Especially since phishing attacks are probably one of the most prevalent ways to compromise systems. And so from a NIS2 perspective, the measures are like very broad, right? Because they talk about access control policies, managing risk from supply chain. They mention things like multi-factor authentication and so on and so forth. But how does that translate into implementing those measures for remote access? We saw over here from the response from our audience here, most of the responses seem to indicate that either it's a VPN or a VPN with a jump box, right? Now, technically, that is a secure solution, but it involves a lot of human effort to make it secure, right? And therein kind of lies the problem. Just like you have fatigue in the SOC because of false alerts, at some point in time, as the number of remote access requests start increasing, fatigue is going to set in, and there's going to be neglect, right? VPN neglect. So typically, if you think about a VPN-based solution, it's an always-on solution, meaning you always have access, and you have to control when people get in and what they have access to using these jump servers, right? And you got to go manipulate firewall rules. Now, if you do that perfectly, you're okay, but you're going to make mistakes, right? And that's the challenge. And so that's where this ZTNA-based approach helps you make sure that you're minimizing risk from remote access. And so we're starting to see customers move from this VPN/jump box into a ZTNA-based approach. So what does that mean? What do these measures mean, and how do they translate into product, right? So when you're looking at product, you have to, I think multi-factor authentication is by far one of the most important things. Like when we're talking about zero trust, we're talking about zero trust of the remote user, right? You start by not trusting who the person says they are, right? Until you reach a point where you're confident that the person is authentic. So I think one of the most basic things you can do is MFA, because phishing attacks are so common these days that you need to verify through multiple methods about the authenticity of the remote user. And then you have to be able to have a posture check of what that remote user is using their workstation to access your network, right? In many cases, you have you need to use agentless solutions are not enough. You need to have native software on your workstation to program, let's say, a PLC, on the factory floor, or a traffic controller on the side of a roadside, right? You need native software, and so posture check of that remote workstation is really, really important. And the other aspect, and one of the most important things is that, especially when it applies to remote users from your supply chain, not everybody needs to see everything. You're letting that remote user come in because they need to access a specific piece of equipment or a specific machine. And so resource isolation is really important. Things that are like really challenging to do with a typical VPN/jump box solution are native to a CTNA product, right? Like you don't need to see what you don't need to access. And so being able to implement that resource isolation is really, really key. And just like I spoke about how posture check of the remote workstation is important, not every remote access requires an agent-based solution. You can go clientless. And the ZTNA products and the client-based approach completely isolate the remote user from the environment. They're not in any way directly connected into your OT network. They're indirectly connected into your OT network. And so you can, they cannot introduce any risk into your environment. And then there's the aspect of who comes in, when they come in, how long do they have access. All of that is really, really key. You don't need to give somebody an always-on access. They just need to come in at a specific point in time. You need to be able to schedule that access. You might want to go one step further and just make sure that they ask for permission and they can't get in until you grant that permission. So fine-grained access control based on time-based and permissions is really important. And then finally, you want to know who's coming in and what they've done. So that audit trail of this remote access, who came in, when did they come in, what did they access, what did they do? All of that is really important. And then you got to take that and then feed it into the SOC, right? For this cross-domain OT/IT visibility. So solutions like secure equipment access from Cisco and feeding that syslog into a cross-domain detection platform like Splunk, make this a whole lot easier for you. And you brought up this important point, Jonathan, which is, yes, you have to meet compliance, but don't take an approach of just checking the checkbox. Use the opportunity to really improve your security posture.
Yeah, I think you brought up a lot of good points as well. So that the comprehensiveness of security trail really talks to some of the NIS2 requirements that we pointed out with regards to compliance as well. But I think overall, what I find is the most interesting and I guess promising with the zero trust approach is that it can have an enormous impact on cybersecurity posture, but at the same time, it's the ease of use. So we talked about VPN, firewall rules, and of course with VPN there's the issues around granularity, etc. Continuous identification now of who the person is, what their role is, what they're allowed to do. It's very complex, but ZTNA comes in and simplifies that complexity and the granularity. And what I really enjoy about this approach, and again, you need to see it in practice too, but it's the ease of use both for the administrator. The administrator can do all of this granular activity, but not they don't have to move mountains to do it, and then the tools actually help them when it comes to managing that as well. So it's that flexibility, I guess, and agility, which is also important. But just as important, or maybe more so for industrial organizations, is the ease of use for the actual operator. We often forget, and a lot of people on the session today will be automation folks or engineers or operations people. They're not always focused on the latest and greatest piece of wizardry on the IT side. So making things simple for the user is incredibly important, right? They're not trying to, they're trying to do their job. You mentioned programming a PLC or getting data off a PLC or updating a PLC, etc. That's what they're trying to do. They don't want to spend an hour or half a day trying to troubleshoot how to get into this remote session. So I think ease of use is something that we don't often spend a lot of time on, but it's incredibly important when it comes to the practical side of zero trust. And having sort of focused on remote access, just want to sort of segue a little bit to the side here. And we're starting to see also beyond remote access. So just sort of access control and this zero trust overlay. Is that something that you're seeing as well, Ruben?
Yeah. So, again, going back to the risk aspect, right? In terms of reducing the impact, it's you are at some point in time going to get breached, right? You can never take the stance that I'm secure. At some point in time, you always have the risk that one way or another you will get breached, and so it's really important to minimize the impact of that breach. So that's where zero trust from the perspective of segmentation comes in. Today, most companies have fairly robust industrial DMZs in place, but everything below that DMZ is typically very wide open. These networks, have a lot of these industrial networks have grown over time. It's never designed like in one point in time. There's always additions being made, and a lot of the best practices that you have in IT haven't been applied while this industrial network has grown over the years, right? So you have very flat industrial networks. It's almost like Swiss cheese, where you have like a hard outer shell, but it's very, very soft inside. And so implementing zero trust segmentation is another really important aspect of taking tackling this with a risk-based approach. Now, segmentation in the enterprise space itself is a complex aspect, right? It's not easy to do, because when you try to get into segmentation on a more granular basis, you typically tend to block legitimate flows and cause disruptions. Now, it's one thing to do that in the enterprise space, but in the industrial spaces, you're always aiming for zero downtime, and the impact of segmentation causing downtime has this knee-jerk reaction from the line of business, the people who are holding the purse strings, to kind of rip and throw the project out, right? And so as we bring in segmentation into this environment, it's really important to do it correctly without disrupting production. So like we said, visibility is key, and you can leverage this visibility to implement the segmentation in a seamless manner. We always advocate at Cisco to walk before you run. In the IT space, when we think about segmentation, we go straight to micro-segmentation. But in the industrial space, it's not about the technology, it's more about operations and people and the ability to implement something like this. So start macro first, right? Below the DMZ, start implementing big zones of segments, and then slowly shrink those zones of trust into smaller zones of trust and get into microsegmentation. So tools like CyberVision have visibility into assets. They understand how, what these assets are, how they're behaving, and you can leverage this visibility to implement the 62443 notion of zones and conduits, right? So think of zones and conduits that a visibility tool like CyberVision can provide you as being virtual segmentation. So you're not really enforcing anything, but at least you can visualize the zones and the conduits between these zones. You can take that context and then share it with platform policy definition points, right? Your firepower management console or your NAC policy engine. You can share that context with these policy definition points that can then implement the segmentation either on firewalls to do macro segmentation or on industrial equipment using ACL, so technologies like TrustSec and SGTs to implement finer grain control on the network itself. And so this visibility is key, because what this helps you do is A, make sure you're not breaking legitimate flows, so you're not causing any downtime, and B, equally importantly, is being able to write this policy in a simple business logic context, meaning most people in the OT space don't keep track of the IP addresses of every single asset that's out there. You might know the IP addresses of your key assets, but like in a manufacturing place, they're not going to keep track of an IP asset of IO, as a distributed IO, as an example, right? And so it's really complex to write segmentation policy either in a firewall or in an ACK policy engine based on IP addresses and MAC addresses, like you tend to do in the enterprise space. You want to be able to abstract that thing and say, zone 1 doesn't need to talk to zone 2, or cell 1 doesn't need to talk to cell 2. If you can, and that's what the OT visibility tools allow you to do. They help you bring that context of what assets and IP address and MAC addresses sit in zone 1 versus zone 2. You share that context, and now you can write your policy without having to deal with network constructs like IP address and MAC addresses. And that's the easy way to do it.
I think what's also incredibly important when you get to this point is that collaboration that we talked about before, collaboration that goes down into the production environment. Because to do segmentation, it really requires an understanding of the equipment that you're trying to protect, and that requires input from the manufacturing side, from the operations, or from the people that understand the pieces of critical infrastructure, whether it's a robot or a safety instrumented systems, etc. You need the people, the operations folks, to understand the equipment and how to use it. So that's the point where you really need that collaboration. They need to be brought in potentially way before that point, but definitely into the when you're ready to start protecting and segmenting and further segmenting these environments. You need to know what's critical to the business critical functions within those environments. So I think with that, very quickly, I will put up the final poll. You can find it, which is a question from Cisco. But while that's up there, I'll leave that up there. I just thought I'll push out to Ewald and yourself, Ruben, as well, just to say, I guess to check if there are any. It all looks very complex. We've hit lots of different topics within NIS2 compliance, but I guess it requires an understanding of the risks in the industrial networks, the key technologies to detect, protect, defend, and log, etc. The incidents that we've seen. It seems quite overwhelming. With your last sort of 30 seconds each, pearls of wisdom, what's your recommendation for where to start? Because as we saw in the very opening poll, a lot of people haven't started or at the early part of the journey. What should they tackle first?
Okay, so I'll bring up 3 points, right? I want to start with the point that you've all made again, that is, time is running out. There's not enough experts in the world who understand cybersecurity and OT enough to help you. So in every company, I think you need to understand that IT has to come in and get into this place to help, right? And always the question is, where do I start? So visibility is key, right? Start with visibility. That's going to help you in your journey. Don't assume that you need specialized products to secure all of OT. Everything that you've built in the enterprise space, you can bring into the OT space as long as you have visibility and context. And then finally, it's if you're overwhelmed and you're challenged, lean on an expert, right? So there are, as in Cisco, we've got Cisco security services teams specializing on NIS2. They can help you do assessments. They can help you with design and deployments, and even manage services. So lean on experts if you need help.
And you have about 10 seconds to wrap up.
Yeah, great point, Ruben. Thank you. Yeah, so my message will be, maybe let's not start from scratch and throw everything you have already away. No, I mean, the message is here, what you have, please leverage it, just plug it into the Splunk platform. We just think in terms of data source, everything is a data source to us. And what Ruben said about cyber vision, for example, it gives you excellent visibility into your OT environment. And we just plug this kind of cyber vision capabilities into the Splunk platform. And then you have this unified holistic visibility where you can correlate and analyze all kinds of tools you have. So unified holistic visibility with a platform approach is my key message for the end.
Perfect. So thanks, guys. And thanks to everyone that joined the webinar. There was some great engagement on the polls, so thanks for that as well. Thank you both from Cisco and Splunk, and thank you to Industrial Cyber for hosting us. And we look forward to seeing you all on the next Industrial Cyber webinar. So thank you very much.